Welcome to This Explainer. Look, today we're tackling what is hands down the most explosive issue in global finance right now, the reality that governments around the world are completely addicted to debt. And I'm not just talking about some abstract economic theory here. This is a massive structural shift that's going to directly impact our savings, our mortgages, and honestly, the whole financial future for all of us. To really wrap our heads around the sheer terrifying scale of this, we kind of have to jump back in time to 1945. That was the last time the average ratio of public debt to GDP in developed countries was anywhere near this staggering. But back then, it was literally the cost of saving the free world after World War II. Today, we've climbed back up to those exact same dizzying heights, but entirely during peacetime. Former IMF chief economist Olivier Blanchard really hit the nail on the head. He warned that these projections just rise, and rise to the point where it gets, explosive. And that's exactly why global macro investors are sounding the alarm right now. See, as debt piles up, the interest payments on that debt start swallowing up the budget, squeezing out all other essential government spending. Eventually, you're just borrowing more cash purely to pay the interest on the money you already borrowed. It is a devastating financial spiral. Part 1. The global debt addiction. So, how exactly did the global economy get hooked on this dangerous cycle in the first place? Let's break it down. A huge chunk of the answer comes down to a string of just massive, unprecedented global shocks. We had the global financial crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, war in Europe, not to mention the insanely high costs of the green transition and our rapidly aging populations. At every single turn, governments basically had to step up as the insurers of last resort. And for a really long time, because we were living in this bizarre world of zero or even negative interest rates, taking on that mountain of debt felt completely free. But spoiler alert, it wasn't. Which brings us to part 2. Enter the bond vigilantes. Because, as we're learning, this debt comes with some seriously powerful, kind of shadowy enforcers. As you probably know, to fund these massive deficits, governments don't just fire up the money printer. They issue bonds. Think of it as a highly formalized IOU. An investor lends a government money for a set time, and they get regular interest payments back. Governments absolutely rely on the open market to buy this debt and hold it as the absolute safe haven bedrock of the whole global financial system. But what happens when inflation starts biting hard and investors start worrying that a government is spending way too recklessly? Well, that's when the bond vigilantes step into the picture. They aggressively sell off government debt when they think a country is losing its fiscal discipline. And when they dump those bonds, yields, the interest rates governments are forced to pay, just skyrocket, which makes borrowing instantly more expensive across the board. So the ultimate suspense right now in modern economics is figuring out exactly when these vigilantes are going to lose their patience. At what exact point does the market just break and trigger a full-blown financial heart attack? Part 3, a real-world warning. And the crazy thing is, we don't even have to guess what that market break looks like. We just lived through it. Take the fall of 2022. The UK's Liz Truss government announced this mini-budget packed with unfunded tax cuts. Well, the bond market took one look, decided the government had zero fiscal credibility, and absolutely revolted. Within days, UK government bond prices fell incredibly fast, triggering this vicious, aggressive sell-off. Borrowing costs skyrocketed so quickly that the Bank of England actually had to swoop in with emergency interventions just to stop the whole ship from sinking. One expert in our source material called this the UK's gift to the world, showing everyone exactly what happens if you push the bond market too far. And if you're wondering why this matters to you, when those vigilantes attack, the average household gets hit instantly with soaring mortgage rates. Now, governments everywhere live in absolute dread of triggering their very own Liz Truss moment. Part 4. The trillion-dollar question. Now, if the UK was just a warning tremor, the absolute epicenter of this global debt earthquake is the United States. Get a load of this reality check. The U.S. federal government spent $880 billion last year just on debt interest. That is 4 times what it was a decade ago. To put that visually, picture the entire U.S. military budget. They are now spending more just to service past debt than they do on defense, and it's fast approaching what they spend on healthcare. It is the literal definition of a debt trap. And if you look 10 years down the road, worst-case projections have U.S. debt hitting an eye-popping 160% of GDP. Since the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency, this isn't just an American headache, it's the linchpin of the entire global economy. Naturally, this ballooning deficit is kicking off some incredibly fierce political battles over how to actually fix it.
To try and pacify these bond vigilantes, we're seeing some new strategies being put on the table. The incoming Trump administration has signaled they want a balanced budget alongside tax cuts, which includes proposing a new Department of Government Efficiency. Figures like Elon Musk have floated a massive $2 trillion cut target. However, impartially speaking, market analysts remain highly skeptical here. They point out that finding spending cuts large enough to mathematically offset those proposed tax cuts without disrupting vital services remains an incredibly improbable challenge.
Part 5. The Hidden Debt Twist. Now, just when you think we're hopelessly trapped in this death spiral, there's a totally different economic perspective, modern monetary theory, that flips the whole script upside down. According to MMT, we are all just tripping over linguistic confusion. We hear the word deficit and instantly assume it's awful. But if you look at basic accounting rules, you literally cannot have a private sector financial surplus, the black ink, without a corresponding government deficit, the red ink. The two perfectly mirror each other. Economist Stephanie Kelton explains it so concisely. Their red ink is our black ink. From this perspective, if you wiped out the government's deficit entirely, you'd actually erase all the private sector's savings right along with it. It suggests government borrowing isn't a disease at all, but rather the exact mechanism creating the public's financial surplus in the first place. Part 6. Diffuse or detonate. So we have these two clashing realities. But regardless of your economic philosophy, global deficits are rising, and inflation acts as pure kryptonite to bond returns. So how does this ticking time bomb actually get diffused? Realistically, governments only have 3 ways out. Option 1, massive austerity and huge spending cuts. But we know from history that's politically toxic and destroys growth. Option 2, command their central banks to manipulate the market and artificially force yields down. Or option 3, stealthily inflate the debt away over time. Just let inflation run a bit hotter than interest rates for a decade, and the real value of the debt quietly vanishes, even if it makes the cost of living a lot tougher for everyday folks. Which sets us up for the ultimate final showdown. On one side, we have the financial heart attack. Vigilantes demand higher yields, borrowing costs explode, and the economy gets crushed. On the other side, the assassinated vigilante scenario. History actually shows us that after World War II, governments quite literally forced investors to accept terrible, below-inflation returns. They ruthlessly executed the playbook and suppressed the vigilantes to stop the death spiral. So, as we conclude this explainer, here is the high-stakes question you really need to be asking yourself. As we enter this new era, will the shadowy forces of the bond market ultimately force governments to their knees, enforcing brutal discipline? Or will governments just rewrite the rules and financially assassinate the vigilantes to survive? It's a showdown that's going to define our global economy for decades. Thanks so much for watching, and keep questioning the data.